Well, happy Mother's Day. Welcome to Comstock Church of Christ. As most of you know, we've been in a series for 3 weeks now that I've been calling Story Time. I've been sharing stories from my life to try and illustrate biblical principles, but also to help you get to know me a little better and help you get more comfortable with sharing your stories with one another. But today is Mother's Day. So I don't know that I have a lot of Mother's Day stories to share. So for that reason, it's my absolute pleasure to invite my mother up to share some stories this morning. Instead of hearing from me about what parenthood might possibly be like, you get to hear from her about what it was like to try and raise the unruly child that you've been hearing stories about.
Well, good morning, everybody. Happy Mother's Day. I just want to assure the boys over there they're going to hear some new stories about the pastor. This is my chance to tell a few stories.
Oh dear.
Just a little bit about our family. I'm obviously Todd's mom, and I'm married to his dad of 43 years. And Todd has an older brother, Thomas, and he's married with 2 daughters, Autumn 3 and Lily 1, and they're expecting their third in a couple weeks. So we're excited. I'm excited to be a grandmother as well. So to begin with, becoming a mother is not always an easy thing for some women. We tried for 11 years before Thomas came along, Todd's older brother. There were many prayers and procedures and medical tests, and the doctors finally said, we give up. We don't know what's up. So we decided, Tom and I decided that we needed to try just one more thing, and that was the U of M hospital. So to make a very long story short, 1 year later, Thomas was born. So with this rambunctious little boy, there are many pressures and sacrifices physically and emotionally with the child. And I had made the very difficult decision that I didn't think I wanted any more children. And so with that, God said, no, I think you should have one more child. And he kind of planted that seed in my heart. And so I said, well, maybe, okay, I will. So went off the pill. Can't get pregnant otherwise. So I went off the pill and was rethinking my thoughts. Do I want to have another child? Am I equipped to do that? I just don't feel like it's something for me. It's really, really hard. When I felt that it was even easier to just go to work than it was to try to raise a child. And so did I really want a second one? We already have one. He's healthy, happy, and good to go. But so when Thomas was 2, I went off the pill, and during that month decided to go that no, I didn't want to have a child. I had talked myself into it, just too many reasons. Childcare was too expensive, and that wouldn't happen, so I would have to quit work. I would be home all the time. How would that affect the budget and all of that? So during that time, well, of course, you can't get back on the pill without having a pregnancy test. So at the end of that month, I called to find out about my pregnancy test and preparing myself to get back on the pill. And on the other end of the phone, I hear, "Congratulations, Mrs. Jones, you're pregnant." I said, "I'm what? Are you sure?" And this voice, very calmly on the other end of the phone says, "Well, Mrs. Jones, if you would like to terminate the pregnancy, we'll have to set up an appointment right away." Oh, that just burned me to the core. I couldn't believe that she was saying that, and I thought, no. And I told her, no, under no circumstances am I going to terminate this pregnancy. So that was, so Thomas was, so to our surprise anyway, it took 11 years to have Thomas, and then now just in one short little month, we're expecting another child. So with this life-changing phone call, God had not only blessed us with one healthy, happy boy, but we were going to have another child. When Todd was born, we started calling the boys TNT for dynamite, because they were dynamite, all right. Todd was our blessing from God. And we never expected to have him, and we never suspected the plans that God would have for him here as a minister at Comstock Church of Christ.
I know you all are stifling a lot of jokes right now, and I appreciate that you're going to save them for emails later. Today, when we're thinking about motherhood, today is about uncertainty. Because motherhood is all about uncertainty. How many of you who've had kids, as soon as you had them or while you were pregnant with them, knew exactly how your kids were going to turn out? Oh, a couple of you are liars. Nice. How many, sorry, that's a little too forward, my bad. For those of you who didn't know, how many of you worried about it? Definitely. Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. The problem is, you have no idea what your kids are going to do, how they're going to turn out. All you know is that your future is now inextricably linked to theirs. What happens to them happens to you. And your future becomes uncertain because you now have entered this unbreakable contract with another human being that you are directly responsible for forever. So please turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 9 with that cheerful thought. We'll go to a cheerful book. The author of Ecclesiastes can be a bit pessimistic at times, but he makes some pretty apt observations about life and about how things often play out and how those things will go. I want to take a brief word just to mention as well. My mom took a risk in sharing that insecurity about, I'm not sure that I want to have another one. She did that with the full expectation that some of you have had that experience as well. That maybe while pregnant or while trying to get pregnant, you had doubts and you had insecurities and you weren't sure about whether you made the right choice or whether this was going to play out okay. That is normal. She's told this story to try and encourage you, and hopefully you can hear yourself in her experience a little bit, and once again, find yourself in the full cloud of witnesses and the full community that is the church, and not feel alone in those kinds of insecurities and those difficult situations. So we're in Ecclesiastes chapter 9. We're going to read verses 11 and 12. Again, I saw that under the sun, the race, Okay, let me start over. Again, I saw that under the sun, the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to the skillful, but time and chance happen to them all. For no one can anticipate the time of disaster. Like fish taken in a cruel net and like birds caught in a snare, so mortals are snared at a time of calamity when it suddenly falls upon them. And the thing that I think that the author of Ecclesiastes has aptly pointed out here is that the difficulty of life is that we don't know what will happen. And more than that, it's that we can prepare as best as we possibly can and still probably not escape the tragedy, whatever that tragedy might be. There is no escape because we are human beings. This is just how it works. So, of course, this applies directly to motherhood because as we're talking about the uncertainty of raising children, what we're really talking about is the uncertainty of life in general. The problem is now there are two people, so you have doubled your chances of having some terrible tragedy befall you fairly directly. The more children you have, the more likely it becomes. We do the same thing when we're married. We do the same thing when we have children. We link our life to someone else's, and we now say, your decision-making or the tragedies that befall you are now mine as well. And this wonderful, beautiful commitment that we make also leads us into danger. And that uncertainty can be unsettling, it can be distracting, it can be paralyzing, it can be frustrating in a lot of ways. But as a parent, you can give your child every possible advantage, and they can still choose the wrong thing, or they can still end up in a situation where something outside of their control happens to them. This is life. This is how life plays out. And this is where our uncertainty in parenting comes from. So I'm going to invite my mom to share another story from her perspective, to talk a little bit about uncertainty, and it will be a story that might sound familiar.
So if you would ask us if we foresaw that Todd would be a minister here at your church, we would say pretty much no. Todd had inherited a temper and a propensity for acting on his anger. And so when he was small, he would flip-flop around on the floor, and what we called it like a bluegill on the ice, because he would just go off and on, and he even mentioned it last week that sometimes he'd even hurt himself. But Tom and I would just look at each other, and we'd shake our heads and shrug our shoulders and just say, "What do you do with that?" You know? So anyway, he did grow up, and in junior high, the ages 11 through 13 are some of the toughest for the maturing preteen. And to add to that difficulty, both of our boys were born in September. So they started school when they were 4 years old. This meant that all of their friends all through school were a year to 2 years older than they were. So it kind of changed things a little bit, the dynamic there for maturity. Well, Todd was in the 6th grade, and there was this incident in the lunch line. And boys, I think this is the one from last week, but we'll tell a little bit more about that. This very large, hyperactive kid was taunting Todd relentlessly, and Todd just wasn't in the mood. He let his anger take over his emotions, took his scissors out of his pocket, and took a stab at the kid, and but luckily the skin did not break. So to say all of that, it would be definitely an understatement to say that Todd's life would definitely change from that day on. And only a few months before that were the Columbine shootings, and so all of the schools across the country were changing their school violence policies. So when Tom was called to come and pick up Todd from school, the principal had already made up his mind that this was an offense that required indefinite expulsion. So he was totally kicked out of the Grand Ledge schools. So now we're thinking, how is he going to get back into school? What if he doesn't get back into school? What if he doesn't get back into any area schools? What if he has to go to military school? How is Thomas going to handle this? How are we going to handle sending our baby, our youngest son, to military school? Well, those horrifying thoughts continued for the 3 weeks that we waited for the school board meeting to happen. And I in particular was on the verge of breaking down any moment and crying. It was a devastating experience. All the men in our family, Thomas, and Todd, were very subdued. There was hardly anyone speaking at all. You can imagine the calm and this air of impending doom hanging over our home, waiting to find out how our lives were going to change in the future, all of us, especially Todd's. But because Todd was such a good student, he'd never been in trouble before, and his sincere remorse for his crime, Ted was given the 16 days of expulsion that he'd already had, and was allowed to go back to school the next week. It could have turned out really bad, and we were just so thankful, and it was still a while before we could even wrap our heads around everything that really had happened. But if you would ask this family of 4 to tell how we would tell you that there's a much, much easier way to learn about the fruit of the Spirit, self-control, than what we had just experienced.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that I wanted my mom to retell this story from her perspective was you can see how these little things, I mean, it was such a short incident. That whole thing probably took less than a minute to play out. And the reverberations from that terrible decision rebounded off the interior walls of our home for months. I mean, we, as a family, were rocked by this terrible decision that I had made. My parents taught me better than that. I'm sure that you can tell that. I'm sure that you don't have to wonder that they told me it probably is not a good idea to try and kill a kid with a pair of scissors. I made the wrong choice. And that action had effects that were much larger than just me. And in fact, I think there's a sense in which I was not even capable of fully understanding the gravity of the situation. I think the brunt of the load was borne by my parents. They understood how difficult and devastating a thing like this could be. All I really understood was that I was in trouble. And I wanted to know when the trouble was going to end. And this is the kind of uncertainty that I'm talking about. When you have a child, you can end up in these situations. There's not really a way around it other than, as the Ecclesiastes author talked about, getting lucky. The race doesn't always go to the swift, nor wealth to the wise. We just are all stumbling through life, and some of us make mistakes that have bigger consequences than others, and some of us scrape by without doing anything really all that terrible. But by the time we make it to the end, it's mostly luck that we survived as long as we did. And this is a hard thing for parents. It's a hard thing to think that your future is now tied to the immaturity of a 6th grader. You think about all the questions that they had to ask, surely many more questions than even the ones that she listed. How much is this going to cost to send him to another school? What are we going to do? What if there's not buses to that school? Does that mean he has to get dropped off on the way into work? Like, how does this change our schedule? It's so much bigger than just this little kid was in trouble and we had to decide what school he was going to go to. It's this huge, huge life-altering event that is completely unavoidable. So, doom and gloom, right? That's sort of my specialty. What do we do? Like, this is how it is. This is the situation. At any moment, it can all just go completely sideways. What do we do then? Where might we even draw comfort? I have a couple suggestions to answer that question. Philippians 4, you don't have to turn there. I'm just going to read it for you. Philippians 4, verses 4 through 7. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Let your gentleness be made known to everyone. The Lord is near. Do not worry about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. And then Galatians 6, verse 9. So let us not grow weary in doing what is right, for we will reap at harvest time if we do not give up. I just want to remind you that motherhood, parenthood in general, really life, but specifically motherhood today, is about persevering in the face of uncertainty. Because we can't know how it plays out, that is precisely the reason why we continue in faithfulness. Because there are no guarantees, we work at trying to do the right thing and make good choices. Because we have no control over this young child who will grow up and how they will grow up, we do our best to raise them well. Motherhood done well is about persevering in the face of this uncertainty. And we recognize that our hope or our confidence comes from the peace that transcends understanding and the hope that we have that we will spend eternity with God. The only two sure things that we've got. Even though life is hard, God is with us. And when life is over, we're not done. That's my suggestion. I suggest that we draw hope from those places. And I'm going to ask my mom to share one more story about where she found hope.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the junior high ages are the toughest for that maturing teenager to kind of find themselves. Their self-image, peer pressure, body image, all of that is really affected the most in the junior high age group. And of course, Todd was no different. He was timid and uncertain about situations. He wouldn't speak in front of a group. And he mentioned last week that it was difficult for him to talk to girls. He even asked me one time, how do I do that? But I guess my answer wasn't exactly what he was expecting to hear. But he was shy and uncertain, and that was definitely evidenced by his posture. I don't know if you've ever seen that kid that kind of holds their head down and kind of looks out at you, and their shoulders are rounded and hands in their pockets. And well, that was Todd. He was very, very quiet and shy. And so it was my duty as his mother to tell him, stand up straight, throw those shoulders back, get your hands out of your pockets. And then along with that was the little lecture, if you stand up straight, take your hands out of your pockets and throw your shoulders back, you'll look more confident. And if you look more confident, you'll feel confident, and then eventually you will be confident. Well, you know how far that went. So he had to learn it on his own. Todd was always comparing himself to his older brother, his older brother. He was never fast enough running, and he couldn't throw the ball hard enough. And we were always encouraging him that he was a good kid and that he had his own special things that he was good at. But he would definitely have to experience that for himself. So, of course, nothing promotes self-confidence faster than being accepted by your older brother and their peers. So this story is about Thomas, the older brother, turning 16, having his 16th birthday party at our home. He just wanted to have some pizza, some birthday cake, play some football. And so he invited about 15 friends over, and for that very thing. And well, just to back up just a little bit, Todd was 13 just 2 weeks before that. So Thomas 16, Todd was 13. And if you remember, I talked about how the kids, all of their friends were a year to 2 years older than they were. Thomas was just turning 16, able to get his driver's license, and all of his friends were driving their cars to the birthday party. So he was, they were at least a year older, because they'd already had their licenses for at least a year. Thomas had invited the 15 kids over to the birthday party, and it was a beautiful day, so they ended up outside messing around and trying to setting up the flag football rules and picking teams. Well, one of the boys that was there in the group was a big boy. He weighed 275 pounds, and he had decided that for picking the captains, that there would be a first takedown rule. First takedown means exactly that. The first one to take down their opponent wins, and they would get first pick. Well, the boys had gone through about 4 different matchups with kids. You know, here's Lee, he's 275. Another one of the kids was 2 1/4, and they just didn't all match up. Well, they finally decided that Todd and Thomas's friend Keith were close enough that would be a good match. So when they made the announcement that yes, it's Todd and Keith, Todd immediately went over to Keith, picked him up shoulder high, and slammed him on his back right to the ground. Winner. So the crowd kind of gathered around, a little bit of a surprise there, and cheered for Todd. And poor Keith, he was humiliated and trying to catch his breath, get back in with the kids. And the girls were there. They weren't really interested in playing flag football at that age. So they easily convinced the boys that they should go in the house, watch a movie, and eat pizza and cake. So after all of that, they never even played football. So acceptance by your peers is a huge issue, and it was no different for Todd. And I know that I shouldn't have been so excited about Todd slamming the neighbor kid to the ground on his back, but Todd had just earned the Cool Younger Brother Award. So he had the opportunity to be able to hang with the older cool kids. So from there on, we saw his shoulders back, his head up, and his hands. We'd occasionally see his hands a little bit more from his his newfound confidence in himself. But because raising children is a very difficult job, I want to leave you with some encouraging words. Your persistence, as Todd talked about, faith, and prayer does not go unnoticed. Continue to lean on the Father for your support and guidance in this noble endeavor of motherhood. God is faithful. And I thank you guys all for listening to my stories about Todd. And they weren't designed, though, they were designed, sorry, getting ahead of myself. They were designed to be teaching stories and not to portray my beloved son in a negative light. These stories are examples of teachable solutions that can happen to anyone who raising their children. Stories about how God molds our little ones into those amazing, godly adults that they are today. I am very proud of the man that God has blessed this family with. Todd, I love you.
Love you too, Mom. I had encouraged her to share some embarrassing stories, more so than the ones that were shared, and she decided to mom out on me and love me more than I love myself, I think. Encouragement can come from unexpected places. I mean, who would have thought that 16th birthday party, something very akin to a fight, which is generally discouraged in our house, ends up resulting in my confidence going up. I mean, who knows? Who knows how this stuff plays out? That's the thought that I want to leave you with, in as much as it's all about consistency and perseverance. Also, open yourself up to receive encouragement from unexpected places, because just as much as bad things can happen out of nowhere, the good stuff comes like that too. Just keep your eyes open, and all of a sudden you'll just go, wow, okay, this is really going to be okay after all. I was worried, but it's going to be okay. So thank you so much. Let me close us in prayer. God, we thank you that life is not according to a script, and we thank you that you have given us this beautiful existence to work out with fear and trembling. And we ask that we would always remember you and that we would call upon your name whenever we're in need. And God, we ask that you would instill us with the confidence to go forth and to live, to not be intimidated by an uncertain future, but to be confident in your love and how your love affects our relationships. God, we're proud to call ourselves your people. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.